All right, so let's start our conversation about leadership with something nice and easy. Let's try to talk about some simple but important principles of leadership. Let's say three principles. Now, if I tell you that leadership is important, that's not hugely surprising. It doesn't blow your hair back. It's not a huge revelation. But we know that in all sectors of society, that's something that people say is critical, right? So global CEOs, if they are surveyed, they usually say that's the key to their company's success. Non-profit leaders, civic leaders also say that we need leadership for positive change, right? Societally, economically, etc. Now, the question that I want to raise with you is what is that exactly when we ask for more leadership? What is it that we want? So I brought a few pictures of leaders here to get us in the right mindset to think about this.
Hey, I see that you didn't bring a picture of Steve Jobs here. Why?
Yeah, good point. So as a teacher of leadership, of course, I always carry a picture of Steve Jobs with me, so we can include him. So if you think about those arguably great leaders, what makes them great? What are the qualities that stand out? And if you're watching this, you can think about what you associate with great leaders.
They were visionary.
Charismatic, to motivate other people.
Oh, that's important.
They brought talents.
No, different kinds of talents, possibly. Yeah.
They really revolutionized the field they were in.
Yeah, transformational leaders. Yeah.
And there is also some emotional intelligence probably involved.
Yeah. Okay. So we can find a number of admirable qualities. Somebody brought us a dictionary. We could be sitting here all week coming up with wonderful words that describe good, effective leaders. The question though is do they all have those qualities in common? What do you think?
Not for sure. I wasn't thinking about Steve Jobs when I said emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I mean he had I never met the guy, but he had a reputation for actually being irritable to some degree, right? Not being particularly nice sometimes to employees. So emotional intelligence maybe not one of his strengths, but he was extremely charismatic, right? And that inspired a lot of people.
Maybe Mother Teresa a little less charismatic.
Yeah, but she was still an effective leader despite that, right? She inspired people through other ways, right? So the point is nobody can be all those things, right? Nobody can be all of those wonderful virtuous qualities together. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is Superman. Heck, even Superman is not an ideal leader, right? He's not that great at empathy and relating to others, right? I mean, he's an alien for crying out loud. So the first principle that we can identify then is that there's no standard formula, right? There's no standard recipe for leadership. All leaders basically develop their own style. Now, when I say that leaders develop their own style, their own unique style, that doesn't mean that they're not facing similar challenges, right? So they all, to some degree, have to motivate others, right? As you said, Nick, they have to develop talent, they have to align people, make tough decisions in some cases, and but they do so with responses that they have developed, right? That work for them, that over time become uniquely their own. They become habits in a way. And those responses also, if we think about it, are often effective, not in isolation, but because of the other things that they do as well, right? So we said, Steve Jobs might not have been emotionally, the pinnacle of emotional intelligence, but he did a lot of other things that counterbalance that still made him an effective leader. So Josh, you might, be fantastic at holding inspirational speeches, right? And people might look at that and say, oh, so that's his secret, right? So we all have to hold more inspirational speeches. But what actually might make him effective is that he actually also devises feasible plans of actually implementing things and following up with people, matching the right talent to the right task and all that, right? Which is less visible, but that's really how you become effective, right? This portfolio of things that you do. So that means that we don't want to look at those individual traits. We don't want to copy those individual practices. And that sounds terribly obvious, right? So don't just copy other leaders. But if you think about what 50, maybe 70% of the leadership literature is about, right? The 6 habits of highly effective people, or level 5 leadership, or the GE way, or the Richard Branson way, or whatever else, it often encourages us to actually look at others and take them as example. We can learn by example, right? But I think the lessons should be a little bit more general. Right? That maybe you don't copy a particular practice or a particular system of leadership, but that it's helpful to have a system in the first place, right? To have a leadership philosophy. That you need an inspiration maybe off the beaten track. Maybe that's important for leaders, but it doesn't mean that you have to take calligraphy lessons like Steve Jobs did. Maybe that's not your thing, right? So the lessons are a little bit more general, right? So the upshot is try to find your own style, right? Try to find your own voice. Now, does it mean that you simply are yourself? Be yourself?
Yeah, that seems pretty necessary.
No? No? No.
Well, if that were true, actually everyone could be a leader.
Yeah, you still have to work kind of on the best version of yourself, so to speak, right? So you still have to work as a leader to develop your competencies. So just kind of relaxing, leaning back, that's for very few of us, that's a recipe for success, let's say. All right, so we know that leaders develop different responses to challenges, maybe uniquely their own, but is there something that they do have in common? Is there something that we can identify?
Yeah, they're all widely revered.
And they all have followers.
Yeah, they all have followers, right? So that's the one characteristic, right? Peter Drucker, famously said once, the only characteristic that leaders have in common is that they have followers, okay? And it makes sense, right? Leaders depend on their followers. If we think about Napoleon, for example, could he have done what he has done without his marshals?
Of course not.
No.
Of course not, no way, right? And his marshals, if you look at them, they were all brilliant military minds in their own right, very capable administrators that managed these hugely complex logistics of the military campaign. They were very loyal, most of them. So he really relied on them, right? The French Empire relied on them. They were the pillars of the French Empire, and we often forget about them, right? Because we don't have time to think about any more than one heroic leader, right? So the followers are very important, and we see that pattern occur again and again. You probably know of the book Team of Rivals about Abe Lincoln, right, and his political leadership. As we see it there as well, right? He got people around him that he could rely on, that supported him, but also that challenged him, right? So he again really relied on his followers. We can think about Steve Jobs, marshals, if you like, right? All brilliant minds of their own, be it Johnny Ive for design, or Phil Schiller for marketing, or Tim Cook, right, as he was head of operations. So leaders depend on their followers, and of course followers depend on their leaders. So one of the principles then, our second principle, would be leaders and followers are an interdependent relationship, right? So leaders and followers depend on one another. Let's think about how they actually depend. How do followers depend on their leaders? What do they need from their leaders? What do you think?
For sure, they need directions and guidance.
No?
Need motivation, inspiration.
Exactly. No? So.
Someone to make the difficult decisions.
Yeah, in some cases, right? Not in all cases. So when we say that followers depend on their leaders, it means that they are helpless, right? So they many cases they make decisions on their own. They're not sheep, right? They give a certain amount of their agency, not all of their agency, to leaders, because they expect that they actually get something from that, right? That they get better outcomes because they get guidance, right? Because they get more motivation because of that, right? How do leaders depend on their followers?
They depend on their skills, on their expertise.
Skills and expertise, yeah.
And followers can provide feedback to the leaders.
Very important. It's sometimes difficult to get honest feedback, right, if you're a leader.
And the leaders can't be everywhere at once, so they need the followers to kind of be their eyes and ears.
Exactly, right? So you can't be attending to everything, so you need that. You need the others to help you with that. No? Exactly. So those are, if you like, the exchange that happens, right, between followers and leaders. So let's dwell on this relationship aspect a bit more, right, between leaders and followers. When you think about relationships, generally speaking, what is required for a healthy, productive relationship, what do you say?
Well, ideally, some trust.
Some trust is good.
They also have to get along. There has to be chemistry.
Exactly. There has to be some kind of fit, right? So both parties need to figure out, what do I want from the other, and what can I contribute to the relationship? Yeah? And that brings us, in a way, back to the principle number one, right? That you need to figure out, do you need your unique own style, your contribution? What can you do, right? That really helps others. And often, that is not that you take charge and set direction and all that, but it actually can be that as a leader, you create an environment that allows others to be effective, creative, find the right way for the future. Sim Sitkin has a great example. He teaches at Duke University. If you teach in the US, it needs to be a sports example. There's an NBA player, Shane Battier, and he is, if you look at the stats, he's not exceptional in terms of shots or assists or blocks, but he by far is better than any all-star player in making sure that his team overall performs better when he's on court than when he's not on court. There's some voodoo, some magic that he does that makes that team perform, right? And Sim takes that as a cue and says, that it's something very important to teach leaders, right? To be aware of as leaders, is that we need to be able to channel the talents, the energies, the genius of others in a way, right? That's the meta talent. Doesn't mean that it's a more important or a better talent, because it's completely useless if there are no other talents around, right? If you're the only one who can manage talent. But it's important. It's an important contribution, right, to focus on as a leader, right, to bring those talents together. So there's one more meta talent, if you will, that I want to highlight. So let's say that Nick is great at encouraging people to be creative, to think outside the box. It does that very consistently, very effectively. But let's imagine it does that a little bit too consistently. Everything that people come to you as a leader to get advice on, we need to revise our HR policy. What should we do?
I would say think outside the box.
Exactly. Customers aren't happy. Our service sucks.
Think outside the box again.
Again, yes, exactly. So you can't be a one-trick pony as a leader, right? So there might be one thing that you do exceptionally well, but you need to be adaptive, right? You need to be able to respond depending on what your followers require. Different people need different things. Different situations require different responses. That's why I don't like strongly normative leadership models too much, right? Be it inspirational leadership or emotional intelligence-based leadership or transformational leadership, because in some situations that is required, and some situations might not be, right? So you need to be adaptive ultimately, right?
But isn't the focus on the relationship between the leaders and the followers normative in itself?
Yeah, a little bit, right? So in a good way, it's still pretty flexible, right? It still allows for a lot of room, but the focus on relationships ultimately is just saying, don't just think of the issues, also think of the people and the relationship that you have with your followers, right? Whatever you do inside that, it allows for many different leadership styles and approaches, right? It is very adaptive. So let's think about that as our third principle, right? Is that leaders need to be adaptive, they need to be flexible to be able to respond to different circumstances, different challenges. This is something that people expect from you, right? That you can handle, especially unexpected, never before encountered situations where you can't just say that, sorry, that's not my area of specialty anymore. They expect some kind of guidance, not necessarily a solution, right? But some kind of guidance. And for that, you want that portfolio of competencies. Doesn't mean that you're embracing every flavor of the month leadership technique that goes to the press, right? But that you build some breadth. I like this idea of a T-profile. You might have heard of T-profile before, right? That you have the vertical part, right? One specialty, right? One thing that you do exceptionally well, but you also have this horizontal part, the generalist skills, right? That allow you to be adaptive in a way, right? That's a good asset to have. Okay, so we started by raising the question of what is that leadership that we want, right? And we saw that it's very difficult actually to pin down, to define exactly, but we try to identify some principles that are helpful for leaders to keep in mind, right? As they develop their own leadership competencies, right? So principle number one, if you recall it.
No standard formula and have your own style.
Exactly, right? So that should encourage you to be reflective, right? To look inside yourself, be a reflective practitioner, as we call it, to figure out, right? What is it that you can contribute? What is your unique contribution? What are your strengths? And maybe what do you want to develop further, right? As competencies. Okay, so principle number one. Principle number two.
Interdependency. So be aware of the relationship between the leader and the followers.
Exactly, right? So managing that relationship, keeping that relationship in mind is a good foundation. It also keeps you humble, right? It protects you from that egomania that leaders might get. That I am the leader, I am doing all the important things here. If you focus on that interdependence, right, you realize that the followers are contributing really, really important things, right? You are channeling that in a way, right? I think that's a good thing, right? Having that humility. And then our third principle was?
That you have to adapt to different situations, so you cannot always have the same approach.
Yeah. Be flexible, right? Don't be a one-trick pony. So that should encourage you to stretch, right? To learn, to push outside of your comfort zone, right? In the way that you lead, that you try new things, right? To broaden your repertoire. Now, all these three principles are good. General orientations for leadership behavior. They're also good behaviors to model for others, right? If you think about it, the figuring out what you can contribute, right? What your strengths are, focusing on relationships and being adaptive, that's something that's good for followers too, right? So you model that behavior, that's really helpful. And before we make things more complicated and think about the international, intercultural challenges, we can say with a good amount of confidence that those principles are universally applicable, right? It doesn't matter where you operate as a leader, right, under which circumstances.